My mother works in an office, and stories like this aren't just numbers and content. They are real-life experience, says this. I see every day this video sold, so can recognize themselves and maybe not repeat other people's mistakes. All names, companies, and artistic in this story are fictitious and have been changed. I knew something was off the second Cade walked into the community center meeting wearing loafers with no socks and that smug little TED Talk grin like he invented the damn perfect lawn height rule. We were barely 5 minutes in before he clicked to the next slide and casually dropped, effective immediately, I'll be assuming full executive control of the Eldridge Estates, HOA, and no thank you to his father Brent. No mention of the longtime residents who built this neighborhood from a pile of dirt and blown budgets. Just a glint in his eye like he'd been waiting to play kingmaker in front of us all. Then, without warning, he turned to me, zero hesitation, and said, Jessica will be transitioning to document processing and backyard violation logging, or if she prefers, she's free to explore other options outside the board. That room went so quiet you could have heard a rat piss on cotton. My mouth didn't open. My chest didn't rise. I just stared at the grain in the conference table while every pair of eyes deliberately avoided mine. Brent didn't speak up. Not a glance. Not a nod. Just a tight jaw and a silent surrender to the new regime. Before we dive deeper, if you're still here, take 2 seconds to like the video and subscribe. 97% of our listeners don't, but it really motivates the team to keep bringing stories like this to life. Appreciate you. Back to Cade. His voice dripped with rehearsed politeness, but I could hear it, the power trip barely hidden under his breath. I'd spent 8 years holding the seams of this HOA together, drafting every ridiculous bylaw, customizing the violation reporting system, and quietly saving homeowners from the endless fines his mother Karen loved to slap on people for mailbox color or the exact shade of mulch. And now I was being offered a beige cubicle in the back office and a label printer like some temp hired off Craigslist. The man couldn't find his own violation citation form if it bit him on the calf. But sure, let's reassign the woman who built the entire enforcement system from scratch to filing duties. The worst part? I saw it coming. Not this exact meeting, maybe, but the unraveling had started the day Cade parked his Tesla in Brent's reserved spot and didn't flinch when a receptionist called him sir. He started using phrases like legacy deadweight and streamlined synergy in the same sentence while sipping his overpriced oat milk latte. He brought in his business school buddies to audit workflows they didn't understand, and one of them actually tried to explain to me how shift rosters work for the neighborhood watch crews who patrol at night. They replaced the reporting tablets I customized with flashy apps that crashed if you touched them with garden gloves on a humid Texas afternoon. I adapted. I always adapted. I never made a fuss, never pulled rank. I stayed late, covered gaps, caught errors before they triggered fines that would bankrupt retired couples. I even redid half of Cade's rebrand rollout when he tried to debut a new HOA website with the wrong coordinates for the community pool. Imagine the Karen-level outrage if every resident showed up at the wrong address for the annual barbecue. I never took credit, never shoved anyone under the bus. But now I was roadkill onto the Cade Express. And he didn't even slow down a honk. I didn't ask for clarity. I didn't push back. I stood up, smoothed out my blouse, looked Brent in the eye, and he looked away. I'll gather my things, I said. That's all. No drama, no door slamming. I caught the slight flicker of Cade's eyebrows, probably annoyed I didn't cry or beg or cause a scene he could brag about later at the country club. I think he wanted the power of watching me unravel in public, the classic HOA Karen power move his mother had perfected over the years. But I'm not made of that kind of weakness. I walked out of that room, heels echoing down the polished hallway I helped design during the community expansion 5 years ago when we actually had a budget that wasn't wasted on unnecessary speed bumps. The irony wasn't lost on me. At the Eldridge hub, my nameplate was already half unscrewed. That part stung more than I cared to admit. I packed in silence. My ergonomic mouse, my backup drives, a ceramic mug I brought from home that read World's Okayest HOA Enforcer. I didn't take any resident files. Didn't touch a single item that wasn't mine. But before I left, I did one thing. I sat down at my desk, opened a folder titled Policy Escalation Legal, drafted a letter, attached 6 documents, embedded timestamp logs, and cross-referenced Cade's verbal reassignment with a very specific clause buried in my updated board service agreement from 2 years ago. The one nobody but me remembered because I was the only person who actually read the fine print instead of just nodding along at meetings. Then I printed the letter, slid it into a crisp envelope, and placed it in the top drawer of Cade's desk, right under his stress ball shaped like a tiny gavel. And just before midnight, I accessed the HOA portal one last time and off-boarded myself using the very checklist I'd written for the association. Clean, compliant, irreversible. The kind of exit that would make even the most entitled Karen pause and wonder what the hell just happened. It started with coffee dates that didn't include me, new Slack channels that didn't have my name on the invite. Then came the sudden reorgs that looked more like purge lists wrapped in branding jargon. Cade was doing what trust fund HOA heirs do best, clearing the table of anything that reminded them they didn't build it themselves. First went Jim from Field Logistics, 30 years of grit suddenly retiring early after one too many complaints about his truck being parked on the street for 5 minutes. Then Linda from Compliance got shifted to a Documentation Insights role, which I'm pretty sure was code for being politely fined out of existence by spreadsheet. I wasn't stupid. I've been around long enough to spot a stage coup, even when it wore designer sneakers, and used phrases like vertical integration of curb appeal. But part of me thought maybe, just maybe, Brent would put a leash on his son before he burned the place down. Then came a call. "We need you in the community center for a senior operations sync," Brent's assistant said in that neutral tone that felt final. I booked the flight. Yes, even HOA board members sometimes travel for big meetings, and packed light, told my partner I'd be back Thursday night unless I came back unemployed. We met in the glass conference room on the 9th floor, the room with the big round table Brent insisted on years ago. No corners, no hierarchy. We're equals, right? Cade strolled in late. He was wearing a cream-colored blazer, no socks, and that same overhand looked like he'd just gotten off a yacht instead of out of a quarterly violation review. He tapped the digital screen, pulled up a deck titled Eldridge Estates 2.0 Leadership Optimization, and flashed a crocodile smile. Brent sat to his right, silent, small somehow, like a man watching his own legacy get chopped up for parts. Cade clicked through buzzwords for 5 minutes. Agility, youthful momentum, generational evolution, before landing the blow. My father stepping all the way back. Effective immediately, I'm assuming full executive control of the Eldridge Estates, HOA, no applause, not even a cough. He glanced around theatrically. Then his eyes found me. Jessica will be shifting to document processing and systems oversight, he said like he was reading off a grocery list. Or if she prefers, we can part ways. That was the part that got me. Not the demotion, not the disrespect, but the if she prefers, like this was a buffet and not an eviction notice dressed in HOA lace. No one said a word. No one looked at me. I could feel the heat crawling up my throat, but I swallowed it. I refused to give him a single inch of performance. Brent didn't meet my eyes, not once, which told me everything. I had done every damn thing this association ever asked. Volunteered during wildfire seasons to help with emergency compliance logs. Slept on cots during pipeline freezes when the power went out and residents needed someone who actually knew the backup generator protocols. Mediated between screaming neighbors and nervous board members over fence heights that were off by half an inch. And now I was a bullet point under transition initiatives. That room had been my battlefield, and in one sentence they'd buried my entire contribution like a casualty of efficiency. I nodded once, slowly, deliberately. Then I stood up. I didn't say a word. Not to Cade, not to Brent, not to anyone, because words at that point would have only diluted what was coming. The building was nearly empty by the time I made it back to the hub. You could hear the faint hum of the vending machine on the mezzanine. That's how late it was. Most people were already home pretending to like their lives under the watchful eye of Karen's enforcement squad. I took the back stairs instead of the elevator. Didn't want to risk a pity run-in with the night staff. My office, while our office since Cade had downsized most leadership to shared collaboration zones, still had my name on the wall panel in dry erase marker. Just Jessica in all caps. No last name, no title. I stared at it for a minute like it belonged to someone else. Then I walked in and got to work. No theatrics, no tears, just quiet precision. I pulled my drawer open and removed my wireless mouse, backup drives, and a little woodblock calendar I'd carved myself during lockdown. I left behind the corporate laptop, the company phone, even my login badge. I'd already wiped my biometric ID from the security system 3 weeks ago. Call it intuition or muscle memory from watching other long-time board members vanish overnight after one wrong complaint about the president's son's parking habits. Then I did what I do best. I documented. I cross-checked the current version of our asset transition protocol, the same one I wrote. I signed out of my accounts using a VPN trace route. No lingering login, no cache sessions. I closed every browser tab, every cloud sync, every linked calendar like a ghost sweeping up its footprints. And then I wrote the letter. Not a resignation, not some whiny farewell rant laced with emojis and LinkedIn cliches. No, this was a notice of record addressed to the Eldridge Estates Board of Directors, CC'd to internal counsel, external legal, and a quietly BCC'd regulatory auditor whose name wouldn't ring any bells for a few weeks yet. The language was surgical. I listed the date and time of Cade's reassignment order, quoted his exact phrasing, referenced the performance metric from my most recent evaluations, still log in the HRIS system, still marked exceeds expectations. I attached a transcript of the meeting recording, lifted directly from the conference room mic I personally installed 4 years ago to avoid, she said, disputes in senior ops calls. Then came the kicker. Section 6.4C of my updated board service agreement, quietly negotiated during the last covenant update back in 2021. A clause no one remembered except me. If my role was materially altered without a written plan or justification and no performance issue on record, I could trigger constructive dismissal, which meant triple severance, accelerated vesting of any deferred compensation, and a contractual penalty the HOA would owe by default. I signed it, scanned it, logged a digital copy in an archive under Policy Escalation Executive with my initials timestamped. Then I printed one clean copy, folded it, slipped it into an unsealed envelope with a paperclip, walked down to Cade's sleek little corner nook, formerly Linda's office before she was repurposed, and opened his desk drawer, the one he never locked because he was too busy posturing about trust culture. I placed the envelope beneath his keyboard, right under the sticky note where he'd written, "Ask Jess for Q3 violation forecast." I closed the drawer, and just like that, I was gone. No farewell email, no inspirational quote, no awkward goodbyes with fake hugs and tighter jaws. I didn't want their sympathy. I didn't even want their regret. I wanted them to underestimate me one final time. And they did. The first buzz jolted me from the kind of sleep that only comes after a war. I stared at my phone, face down on the nightstand, screen lighting up like it had something urgent to say. I let it ring again and again. At 9:04 it was Cade. At 9:07 a.m., Slack notification auto-forwarded to my personal email. By 9:11, the executive assistant, still using my name and calendar requests, tried to invite me to a Q3 review meeting. By 9:26, Cade's voicemail cracked through in full panic. "Where are you? We've got questions on the Q3 violation projections. Legal said they're still waiting on your cost analysis. Can you please just call me?" I poured coffee instead. What Cade didn't know, because he never bothered to read anything without bullet points and emojis, was that I had taken myself offline hours earlier. At precisely 12:01 a.m., I had deactivated my credentials using the exact self-offboarding workflow I'd built during our last compliance audit, a checklist they still use to onboard new board members. Irony is a hell of a drug. I didn't just log out, I disappeared. My access token revoked itself. My shared folders archived and locked. Every cost sheet, every model, every single quarterly breakdown, Cade now needed flagged with digital watermarks that required admin unlocks. Admins who didn't even realize I'd coded fail-safes for transfer notifications that alerted audit if someone tampered post-departure. Meanwhile, the letter. The letter. While Cade was fumbling through my folders like a toddler in a hardware store, the board compensation committee was reading it with their morning espresso. It hit at 8:09 a.m. Sharp. Subject line, Notice of Constructive Dismissal. Section 6.4C trigger. It included attachments, 3 years of performance logs, audit trail documentation of every contribution I'd made to the Q3 forecasting process, Cade's exact words from the reassignment meeting. Thanks to those conference mics, and a calendar timestamp proving there was no written performance plan offered before the transition. I CC'd legal. I CC'd internal audit. I CC'd the compensation committee chair who I once helped through a private tax audit nightmare when she forgot to declare vendor equity. I also included 2 outside addresses, one to the Department of Labor Compliance Division, the other an independent industry ethics watchdog Cade had tried to charm at a panel once. Bad idea to flirt with someone you never Googled. By 10 a.m., they weren't wondering where I was. They were realizing how badly they'd underestimated what I'd built. I took another sip of coffee, watched the sun spill across the kitchen counter. No anxiety, no second-guessing. They thought I'd leave quietly, that I'd tuck my tail between my legs and disappear like every other seasoned board member Cade reimagined. But I wasn't a casualty. I was the catalyst. Cade never bothered to read contracts. Not really. He skimmed. He postured. He had a lawyer named Trevor who printed things out on ivory stock and told him where to sign with a little red arrow. The man treated compliance like it was a buffet. Take what looks good, ignore the rest, and if it bites back later, call PR. But I read everything. Every line, every addendum, every footnote, especially the one buried in my updated board service agreement, slid across the table during the 2021 covenant update chaos. While the association scrambled to update its underperforming solar-powered streetlight division, I negotiated my worth in quiet paragraphs and invisible ink. Section 6.4C. I remember the exact wording. If the board member's core responsibilities are materially reduced, reassigned, or eliminated without documented cause or a formal performance improvement plan within 10 business days of reassignment, such action shall be deemed constructive dismissal. It was one of those phrases that sounds like legal wallpaper until you need it to become a sword. And now, Cade had just walked into it face first. No written plan, no documented cause, just a smug public mic drop and a room full of cowards who let it happen. And me? I had receipts. First, the audio transcript pulled from the smart mic in the conference room, triggered by keyword detection. The moment Cade said, Jessica will be shifting to document processing and systems oversight, the software tagged it as a change of role directive, timestamped, stored in 2 redundant cloud backups under legal flag priority. Then the meeting invite still sitting in the server logs. Subject, Senior Ops Transition Review. No agenda, no mention of reassignment, no warning. Then came the performance data. Not a single red flag. My most recent review was stamped exceeds expectations. My team KPIs were up. Compliance errors 0 in 12 months. I even had a kudos email from Brent thanking me for catching a vendor invoicing discrepancy that saved the association nearly $600,000. All of it added up to one very clean conclusion. Cade hadn't just made a bad leadership decision. He'd triggered a legal event. And the consequences? Triple severance. All deferred compensation vested immediately. And an automatic contractual penalty equal to 1.5 times my annual base owed whether I signed an NDA or not. I had locked every one of these details into my letter. Not as threats, as statements of fact, the kind of facts that lawyers can't argue with. And while Cade probably assumed I was at home, crying into a pint of ice cream, The board's legal team was already in damage control mode, trying to untangle how one idiotic sentence had just cost them nearly $1 million. All because he wanted to flex in front of a conference room full of sheep. He thought I'd go quietly. He didn't know he'd walked straight into a clause I'd planted 2 years ago while he was too busy Instagramming from a company retreat in Aspen. They thought I was just being thorough. That's the beauty of process audits. Nobody questions the woman who builds the workflows. The HOA had gotten so used to me filing reports, updating templates, tightening security on the digital archive that when I put in a request for a full export of my internal reviews and project logs, it raised 0 alarms. Standard retention audit, I'd said. And they believed me because I always spoke in policy language, always wore the mask of calm, compliant professionalism. What they didn't realize was that every click, every export, every just-in-case folder I created was its own little insurance policy. Invisible unless you knew where to look. Bulletproof if you did. That file bundle was gold. 5 years of performance reviews. Every one stamped exceeds expectations. A detailed log of completed projects, many of which have been tagged critical risk mitigation by our own board, screenshots of Slack threads where execs praise my ability to clean up behind leadership missteps without ruffling feathers. Even a forwarded email from Brent dated last October thanking me for quietly saving our ass again. Don't know how you keep doing it. I'd even kept a side folder labeled shadow work, documents, tasks, vendor negotiations that never made it on any official schedule, but that I handled when others dropped the ball. I didn't need anyone to notice it before, but now it made a hell of a record. The letter I left behind was no angry manifesto, no scorched earth goodbye. It was surgical, 1 page, single-spaced with footnotes. It started with a polite acknowledgement of the reassignment and a recap of the meeting, date, time, participants, and Cade's direct quote about document processing and systems oversight. I stated there had been no written justification provided, no documentation outlining performance concerns, no follow-up review plan or meeting scheduled. Then I listed the attached documentation, internal reviews, audit logs, achievement summaries, a matrix comparing my current role to the reassigned, one showing a 72% reduction in scope and strategic authority. And finally, I cited the clause, Section 6.4C of the amended agreement, constructive dismissal trigger conditions met, remedies due, and I ended it like this. Per the terms of Section 6.4C, I consider this reassignment a qualifying event under the constructive dismissal clause. Please route final settlement, including severance, equity acceleration, and contractual penalty through my legal counsel. I am open to resolving this matter amicably and without further escalation. Timeline for response, 10 business days. No threats, no emotion, just law, math, and a paper trail no one could contest. I filed the letter in 3 places. Physical copy in Cade's drawer, digital copy in the shared archive with restricted access permissions, and one via auto send to the board's compensation committee scheduled for 8 a.m. The following morning. They wanted paperwork. I gave them paperwork wrapped in their own procedures, stamped with their own metrics, and loaded like a round in a chamber Cade never thought to check. I was sitting on a bench just outside the Denver office, same bench where I used to take calls during breaks, where I talked an intern out of quitting in tears, where Brent once told me I had steel in my spine. Funny how quiet places become war rooms when the paperwork lands. The email came through at 2:17 p.m. Subject, constructive dismissal, Section 6.4C. I opened it with the same calm I'd worn through every meeting of my career, even the ones where men twice my salary explain my own workflows back to me. We have reviewed MS. Ramirez's letter and supporting documentation. Based on the timeline and the reassignment language used, the triggering condition under Section 6.4C is confirmed. Settlement to follow under contractual terms. There it was. Clean, final, surgical. No apology, no attempts to justify Cade's behavior, just confirmation that I had built the trap, laid the bait, and they'd stepped right into it. I forwarded the message to my attorney with a single line, ready when you are. By the next morning, the first draft of the formal settlement offer landed in my inbox. Severance at 3 times base, all deferred compensation immediately vested. A tidy bonus for legal fees. And tucked near the end, like they hoped I'd skim, was a supplemental non-disclosure agreement. Boilerplate fluff about protecting brand reputation, non-disparagement, mutual confidentiality, etc. I didn't even blink before deleting that paragraph from my return copy. If they wanted my silence, they'd have to fight for it in court. But I knew they wouldn't because the math was simple. Fighting me meant discovery. And discovery meant pulling the threads on everything Cade had touched since he took over. Every nepotistic hire, every reckless budget cut, every performance-based termination with no documentation to back it up. They didn't want exposure. They wanted containment. So I gave them that on paper. The money cleared within 48 hours. My badge accessed it, which made me laugh, honestly. Somewhere in some system, I was still listed as active staff. Cade probably hadn't figured out how to fully offboard me yet. Fitting, since he'd never understood how onboarding worked either. The people who ran things quietly were not always easy to erase. I sat back on that bench, letting the wind push my coat open. It was cooler than usual for September. Across the street, I watched someone walk into the building. Probably Cade. Probably still pretending he was in control of anything that mattered. He'd gotten the title. I got the terms. And no matter how many meetings he held, or speeches he gave, or hashtags he forced on company memos, that signature from General Counsel was the only one that counted. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday. No fanfare, no courier, just slid through the mail slot like it was another piece of junk paper wedged between coupons and a dentist flyer. But the Eldridge letterhead was unmistakable. Clean, matte, minimalist, the kind of branding that says, we spend more money on tone than function. I stood there for a moment, envelope in hand, before opening it. Part of me expected some final insult, an NDA, threat maybe, or a petty note from Cade's assistant reminding me to return a badge I already deactivated. But the handwriting stopped me cold. Brent's, not typed, not dictated, not signed off with corporate flourish, just black ink on thick stock. And the kind of handwriting you only learned from years of writing meeting notes by hand before tablets made everyone forget how pens worked. I didn't fight for you. I should have. This wasn't the way. That was it. No greeting, no warm wishes, no I hope this finds you well. Just 7 words. I reread it 5 times before noticing the real weight of the page. A second document beneath the note. Legal formatting. 1 line highlighted in yellow. Authorization of accelerated equity vesting. Below the line, a single signature, Brent Eldridge, not Cade, not legal. Brent. I leaned against the kitchen counter, thumb grazing the edge of the paper like it might flinch. It didn't make me feel triumphant. It didn't undo the silence in that conference room. But it said something. Maybe not loudly, maybe not soon enough, but clearly he knew. He knew Cade had botched it. That legacy isn't just built on numbers or innovation or headcount charts. It's built on people who held the rope when everything else frayed. And I was that rope more times than he probably ever realized. The founder's signature told me 2 things. First, that someone on that board still had enough spine to admit the damage. And second, that they wanted it to end quietly. They didn't want a press leak, didn't want industry whisper campaigns, didn't want the internal panic that would ripple through the remaining senior staff if word got out that one sentence, one smug little corporate reshuffle, had cost them a strategic pillar and 6 figures in penalties. They didn't want me to drag it into the light. But I didn't need to because I wasn't after revenge. Not anymore. What I wanted was recognition, not performative applause or fake LinkedIn endorsements, just acknowledgement that what they discarded was never disposable. And Brent's signature scrolled under a clause his son probably never read was the closest I was ever going to get. I folded the paper carefully, put it in a folder marked final terms. Then I made a pot of coffee, opened my laptop, and started reading through offers from consulting firms who'd already heard I was suddenly available. Funny thing about being erased. If you planned your exit right, Your absence says more than any letter ever could. The quarterly filing dropped on a Tuesday. Most people ignored it. Just another dense stack of numbers and sanitized language meant for investors who only care if the trend line points up and to the right. But I still had alerts set for Eldridge's SEC disclosures. Old habit. Hard to let go of an association you spent nearly a decade holding together with nothing but foresight, duct tape, and your evenings. The line was buried deep. Page 17. Right after the section on executive compensation restructuring and right before the amortization schedule for software license costs, tucked under a bland heading, unusual compensation events. There it was, one sentence. Separation benefits paid under constructive dismissal classification section 6.4c due to reassignment without performance justification. Dry, clinical, surgical, and devastating. That single line said more than any press release could. It said, I didn't just walk away, I forced their hand. It said their streamlining came with a legal price tag. It said Cade Whitaker's little stunt wasn't just poor judgment. It was a contractual misfire with a six-figure receipt attached. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with a text from a former colleague. Just saw the Q filing. That one sentence cost them close to $900K. Cade's face in the Monday meeting was priceless. I didn't reply because I wasn't in that meeting. I wasn't in the office. I wasn't in the Slack channels. I wasn't reading the backpedals or hearing the excuses or watching Brent try to patch the cracks his son created. I was gone. Not hiding, not licking wounds, just done. And while Cade probably thought my silence meant defeat, what he'll never understand is that some wins don't make noise. Some victories aren't loud or flashy or broadcast in all-hands calls. Some of them are one line in a filing, unassuming, precise, permanent. They thought they were cutting fat. They were severing a nerve. And in doing so, they signed off line by line on their own reckoning. By the book. The quarterly filing dropped on a Tuesday. Most people ignored it. Just another dense stack of numbers and sanitized language meant for investors who only care if the trend line points up and to the right. But I still had alerts set for Eldridge's SEC disclosures. Old habit. Hard to let go of an association you spent nearly a decade holding together with nothing but foresight, duct tape, and your evenings. The line was buried deep. Page 17. Right after the section on executive compensation restructuring and right before the amortization schedule for software license costs, tucked under a bland heading, unusual compensation events. There it was, one sentence. Separation benefits paid under constructive dismissal classification section 6.4c due to reassignment without performance justification. Dry, clinical, surgical, and devastating. That single line said more than any press release could. It said, I didn't just walk away, I forced their hand. It said their streamlining came with a legal price tag. It said Cade Whitaker's little stunt wasn't just poor judgment. It was a contractual misfire with a six-figure receipt attached. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with a text from a former colleague. Just saw the Q filing. That one sentence cost them close to $900K. Cade's face in the Monday meeting was priceless. I didn't reply because I wasn't in that meeting. I wasn't in the office. I wasn't in the Slack channels. I wasn't reading the backpedals or hearing the excuses or watching Brent try to patch the cracks his son created. I was gone. Not hiding, not licking wounds, just done. And while Cade probably thought my silence meant defeat, what he'll never understand is that some wins don't make noise. Some victories aren't loud or flashy or broadcast in all-hands calls. Some of them are one line in a filing, unassuming, precise, permanent. They thought they were cutting fat. They were severing a nerve. And in doing so, they signed off line by line on their own reckoning. By the book. The special assessment notices went out 2 weeks later. Every homeowner in Eldridge Estates got a polite letter explaining that due to unforeseen legal obligations under governing documents, each property would be assessed an extra $900 this quarter. The Karen-level outrage in the neighborhood Facebook group was glorious. Screenshots of Cade's smug LinkedIn post about modernizing leadership got ratioed into oblivion. Residents who once nodded along at meetings were suddenly quoting Section 6.4c like it was scripture. Karen herself tried to spin it in the monthly newsletter. We remain committed to transparency and community values, but the comments were brutal. Values? You mean your son's values? One neighbor wrote. Another posted the full text of my letter. Someone had leaked it, probably the same audit chair I once helped. Cade's mother Karen, the original HOA Karen who started this whole mess with her selective enforcement of rules only when it suited her social calendar, suddenly found herself fielding calls from furious retirees who just lost their annual cruise money because of one entitled kid's power trip. The board tried to call an emergency meeting to address community concerns, but half the members didn't show. Brent sat in the front row, looking smaller than ever, and when someone asked him directly if he approved the reassignment, he just stared at the table the same way he did that day in the conference room. Cade wasn't even there. He'd taken a sudden personal sabbatical to Aspen, probably Instagramming more photos while the lawyers cleaned up his mess. The final irony? The new compliance officer they hired to replace me lasted exactly 3 weeks before quitting in a very public email that cited toxic leadership and disregard for the very bylaws we're supposed to uphold. Turns out the flashy apps still crashed. The violation logs were a nightmare, and nobody knew how to run the system I built because I was the only one who ever bothered to document it properly. I watched it all from my new consulting office downtown, sipping coffee that tasted a little sweeter these days. My phone buzzed one last time. Another offer, this one from a national HOA management firm that had seen the filing and wanted someone who understands the fine print. I smiled, closed the laptop, and stepped outside into the sunshine. The neighborhood looked the same from a distance. Perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, the quiet illusion of control. But underneath, something had shifted. The Karen regime had been exposed, the heir apparent humbled, and a single woman who refused to scream had reminded everyone that the real power in any homeowners association isn't the title or the blazer or the no-sock loafers. It's the woman who writes the rules, remembers the clauses, and waits. They thought they were cutting fat. They severed nerve. And the whole neighborhood felt it. By the book. And that, my friends, is how you turn an HOA Karen's worst nightmare into the most satisfying justice you'll ever see. If this story hit home, drop a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what's the most ridiculous HOA rule you've ever had to fight? Because trust me, the next one might just be your own claws waiting to strike. Until next time, stay compliant, stay quiet, and always read the fine print.